Midterm Academic Assistance. This webinar is sponsored through the Parent and Family Programs, Miami University's Division of Student Life, and the Ranella Learning Center. My name is Gary Ritz, the Associate Director of Ranella Learning Center, and I'm pleased to present the information to you today. Before we get started, we want to make sure that everybody can hear, and so there should be a chat tab on your screen if you could indicate whether the sound is okay for your computer. And this is also the location if you have questions anytime through the presentation that you can type those questions in, and a person that is in the office will relay those questions to me and I can answer them on a timely basis. You do not have to wait to the end in order to ask your questions. So if everybody could, in that chat box, just indicate if the sound is okay on your computer that you can hear me. So again, my name is Gary Ritz, the Associate Director of Ranella Learning Center, and our topic today is on post-midterm academic assistance, how to discuss grades with your child, the support and services that are available here at Miami University after the midterm grades have been posted. And so for your information, if you're not aware, students were able to view their midterm grades last Friday, which was October 19th. Students are able to see those midterm grades by going to their My Miami page and looking under the banner web tab. Faculty and instructors of first-year students, mainly our first semester freshmen, are highly encouraged, if not even demanded, to provide a midterm grade to students. Some instructors are kind of late in this process, and also instructors for, say, upper-level students, second, third, or fourth year, aren't necessarily required to do this, but are also highly encouraged to do that. So you may see some grades posted, but there might be a couple classes where they were not posted. If the grades were not posted, we encourage students to ask their instructors or meet with them individually just to see, again, where they stand in the class at the midterm time. Please understand, when Miami looks at GPA calculations, they do not look at the midterm grades in calculating calculating their GPA. Only the final grades that are issued at the end of the semester are reflected in a student's GPA calculation. The other date to keep in mind as we're going through this webinar is that next Monday is a very important date for students. This is the final withdrawal date for the university. This means that if a student is not doing well, they do not think that they're going to be able to finish a course in a timely manner and have success in that course, they may choose to withdraw from the class by next Monday, and that is the last date to do that. In order to withdraw from a class, the student will email or should email that instructor with the detailed description that they desire to withdraw from the class and include the class name, the class title, as well as the date and time that it does meet, so that way that instructor then will follow through with the process in order to withdraw them from that class. If a student withdraws from a class, that class does not then get calculated into the GPA calculation. A W does appear on the transcript for the student that they withdrew from the class, but again, there is no grade that is issued then at that point to be calculated into the GPA at the end of the semester. Students may want to consider that very carefully as far as the withdrawal date and if they are going to withdraw from the class, because it might have some implications for financial aid, as well as might have implications if the student stays at a full-time student status, which is again taking 12 credit hours during a semester. And so they are advised to talk to the one-stop as well as maybe their academic advisor before withdrawing from the class. And so again, you may want to have a discussion about that since the last withdrawal date is next Monday, October 29th. The one thing that I always start this webinar with is kind of giving you some advice about how to talk to your child about their academics, because that is a very difficult conversation sometimes. When I talk to a lot of parents and meet with them, Oftentimes they'll ask their student, how's it going, how are classes, and you typically get the 4-letter answers, and you probably have experienced this as well, that everything is fine, everything is good. Well, that isn't necessarily always a true, accurate, honest answer, and so what we encourage you to do is dive a little bit deeper by asking some very specific questions along the way. And so the next few slides are going to be based on some research that we've done with parents, as well as just some advice about how to talk to your child about the academics. A lot of the students, especially first-year students, don't necessarily know what their educational and career goals are, or even how to approach that goal. And so oftentimes they might rely on others to help them with that. And so again, if you can dive deeper into that to understand what your child's goals are, you know, is their goal to get a 3.0 in a semester, or is their goal just to get a 2.0? What is their career goal? Are they in the right major type of things? Having those discussions, again, may help to see and judge what the motivation of the student is during that semester's time period if they are truly engaged in their classes. But they can, again, family members can help begin working towards creating small achievements like completing all assignments and extra credit on time. What we oftentimes talk with students is that they need to take small steps, and so even those small achievements will add up to be great achievements in the long run. And so again, if 1 week the goal is to complete all the assignments, that might be a very strong goal for a student. Or maybe for another student is attending all classes because they're struggling with that. And so again, having the students set some educational goals, as well as then asking them about those goals and looking for the small achievements that are happening towards getting towards those goals. We encourage them to dream big, but again, the preparation is really a small process, almost a day-to-day, if not an hour-to-hour process in order to be successful here at Miami. After, again, a lot of these small achievements occur over time, that overall goal can be met. We always say that getting a diploma at Miami is not a sprint. It is kind of a marathon type of process, but getting to that finish line is the ultimate goal, however long it takes. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be an instant sprint that you have to have everything done all at once and have everything in line all at once. Students do experience some pains along the way, just like any race, but again, we want them ultimately to get to that finish line and have that ultimate goal achieved at that point by walking across the stage to get that diploma. So a couple of things that we often tell parents to talk about with their child is to begin asking them first about their achievements in class. And so that way, again, you're starting things on a positive note. You know, what are they wanting to achieve that semester? Making them kind of voice it out sometimes is very beneficial. And what led you to successes in previous semesters, or even in high school if this is their first semester on campus. We work with students a lot in the Ranella Learning Center, and that's what we kind of focus on, is where were their successes and what did they do in order to get those successes. Because if they, again, find something that works for them, such as different study habits, study skills, note-taking skills, test preparation skills, whatever it was, if they are able to replicate those successes over and over again, once they find what worked for them, then ultimately they are succeeding in most of their classes at that point. Every learner is different, every student is different in how they learn and approach classes, and that's where, again, we try to figure out with the student what are the different skills that they have and what they can build on in order to have those continued successes, but also, again, making sure they reflect back on what they did in order to get them. Asking them throughout the semester about their successes and challenges is very important. They may get annoyed, but that's okay, because they need that accountability partner, because that is what they had in high school where you were involved, but again, at college, sometimes they don't have that. And so asking them on a continuous basis where their successes and also where their challenges might be. So if they do have a big assignment or exam coming up, asking them what their preparation process is, and if they've already started on those assignments or started studying for those exams in a proper way. Asking them what classes they find easy and what they find challenging, and what they are doing in order to meet some of those challenges within those challenging courses. And also, do they need any help? And again, that is one of the biggest struggles that students here at Miami, especially first-year students, have, is asking for help. Because in high school, many of the students were successful with not having to do a lot of extra work or putting in a lot of time to their academics. All of a sudden, they're having to do that. And so it's okay to ask for help. And so what I always stress to parents and students through our Ranella Learning Center is that we expect them to ask for help along the way in order to meet those goals, whatever that goal may be. And so that expectation is there. They need to get over the hurdle of kind of telling themselves, well, maybe I do need help at this point. And once those midterm grades pop up and some things aren't necessarily where they want them to be, then that's, again, where we highly encourage them to ask for help. One of our busiest weeks of the Learning Center is actually weeks 6 and 7 and 8, because those midterm grades start popping up. Students have gotten some of the initial exams back and didn't do as well as they thought, so then they're asking for help at that stage. And so again, we would continue to encourage students to do that, and even if it again is late in the semester, just to get the help that they need to finish strong. So that's where you can be a partner with us. And item 3 here is asking your child if they considered meeting with other students in study groups or considered getting a tutor. Again, asking for help with their peers and/or through the resources that are available to them. We encourage you to refer them to the Ranella Learning Center, and later in the webinar I'll talk about all of our different services and how students can access those services. Another great question to ask your child is that whether if there is an SI or supplemental instruction leader involved with their course, and they will know if they have one, because that is a person that weekly has some review sessions for students just in their section. This is a peer leader, and it's a very popular service that the Ranella Learning Center offers, but it is, again, additional time where students can ask for help. They'll listen to the material again, but it can ask those questions in a little bit more comfortable environment. If they are getting help in a group or from a tutor, then don't be afraid to ask about how those things are going. So ask about that tutoring process. Ask about what their study groups are involved and how that makeup is of those study groups and what they do. Again, asking those questions is diving deeper rather than just simply if you ask them, well, how's that going? Again, you may expect that 4-letter word of fine or good as the answer. And so we encourage you to dive deeper into the details of what they're doing in order to be successful in their goals and also assessing their challenges. One thing that we always encourage, though, parents and family members to do is always congratulate them on their successes, no matter how small they may be. And what we mean by that is maybe on their first exam they didn't do as well in a class that they thought. Maybe they got a 65% on that. But maybe the next exam it jumped up to a 72%. Even though that might be a small, kind of achievement for them, it is something to kind of celebrate that they are improving, they've figured out some ways to improve, and we want to encourage them to, again, analyze, reflect on what they did differently, and try to replicate some of those routines, as well as then tweak some things to continue to build that success. Students that very first semester are often very, very intimidated on that first exam. And so if their first exam didn't go well, hopefully they are using that as a learning process. They were probably very intimidated because they've never taken a college exam before to know what to expect. And every instructor or professor does test a little bit differently. And so learning how that instructor tests or conducts an exam, that very first one that they take, is oftentimes a very big learning experience to know how to study for their second exam or their final exam in that case. And so, again, congratulate them on that success of doing better and encourage them to, again, continue to work at it in order to, again, make those small steps towards those goals that they have set for the semester. So we transitioned about what can be done. So if you have seen the midterm grades of your child and they aren't necessarily on par of what you expect or maybe what the student expects, so we encourage them to do a couple different things if they can, not to give up by any means, and not to think that they're not smart enough for college, but they might have to work a little bit harder than what they have in the past. Again, it's an intimidating transition time for a lot of students, and so once they get their feet underneath them and understand how the college process works and how college classrooms work, what's expected of them outside of the classroom, then oftentimes they start to, again, build on those skills and do better towards the end of the semester. But the first few weeks are a challenge for many students for a lot of different reasons in and outside of the classroom. So one thing that we highly encourage, and this is what we would say is their primary resource, is their instructor or professor themselves. Almost all instructors and professors will have weekly office hours that they set aside for their students to be able to come in and ask questions that they might have about their courses. And so I would ask, if I was a parent, when are the office hours, especially if it's a class that they're not doing well. See if the student knows. If not, encourage them to look on their syllabus because that's where those office hours are going to be listed. And if they aren't able to go into the office hours because maybe that conflicts with another class that they're in or something like that, we encourage them to still contact their instructors by email and just to make sure that they're using proper email etiquette. Oftentimes students fall into the texting stage when writing emails to friends. But when they are emailing an instructor or a professor, they need to make sure it's in a proper email etiquette, meaning that they need to have things clearly listed, not using abbreviations or slang or anything like that, and just simply see if that professor or instructor might be able to meet with them on an outside of office hour time in that case. And many instructors do accommodate that or are flexible about that. Or possibly the instructor will say, well, just email me your question and hopefully I can reply back to you that question through email as well, and they can, again, have that back and forth communication. This is their primary resource. We know that tutoring's available on campus and stuff like that, but again, the primary resource is that instructor because they are the ultimate expert of that course. This should be that very first contact. We also encourage students, especially if they don't necessarily agree with their midterm grade or they're confused why that grade was issued, to also make contact with that instructor even this week or next week, because that's fresh in the instructor's mind rather than waiting till week 15 right before finals when they're trying to address something in the early half of the semester. And so if a student is confused about why a certain grade was issued for a midterm, we encourage them to talk to that instructor as quickly as possible to see whether there was something that was entered wrong and or that instructor can talk about why that grade was issued for the midterm. Secondly, at this time, students usually are at the beginning of the semester don't know people in the classes, but after about 4 or 5 weeks, they're typically starting to talk to each other in either group activities within the class, the people that they sit next to, possibly they've made friends with them. We encourage them to form study groups, especially, before the next exam at this point. Study groups can be very valuable. What we often talk about when we advise people about their study groups is to use the study group in a metacognition type of way. And what I mean by that is have the students teach each other the material. When they're able to teach it to somebody else, they actually understand the information even stronger. And so we encourage then the people that are listening to that instruction from one of the group members to be able to listen carefully to see where the content maybe holes are, or where there's some misunderstanding and or lack of knowledge, so that way they can help fill in those holes and help with a student that might be struggling on a certain concept. And so we don't encourage students just to talk to each other about just simply the material or just look over it without talking at all and just kind of being silent with that. Have them be active with each other, teach each other the material, work through problems together, and talk about why things are happening, and that will deepen some of the understandings. Oftentimes, these students are also in their residence hall, so a lot of the living learning communities, some of the students have classes at the same time or have the same class because they're built that way. So we encourage them to kind of talk to their residence hall members, the other people that live around them, to see if they're taking some of the similar classes, and maybe they can also be formed into study groups to help with answering those questions. Oftentimes the courses might have different instructors, but they might have the same textbook, same material that's being covered, so even if they don't have necessarily the same instructor, they could still help each other out. We often, though, encourage the students to make sure that the other students know what they're doing as well. If they are going to seek private tutoring or have a friend in a hall that's taken the class before, they may ask what grade that person got in that course, because we don't want that student to ask for help with somebody that didn't do well in the course to begin with. And so we encourage them to make sure that if they are going to seek a private tutor or get help with somebody else, that student does know what they're doing as well and can answer questions in a very effective and efficient way. One of the biggest challenges that a lot of our students have in this very first semester, especially new freshmen, but also seniors, often is improving their time management. And so I can't stress this enough, that the better planning they have, the better and more efficient they're going to be with their time when they go to study for tests and so on. We oftentimes hear students come into the Ranella Learning Center and said, I spent hours and hours and hours studying for an exam, and then it didn't look like it was from the same class when I went in to take it. Well, it might not necessarily be them not understanding the content of the material. It could be the efficiency of how they're studying in that case, and they shouldn't have to be spending 20, 30 hours just to study for one exam. So what we talk about is just that process a little bit, but it all starts with planning and seeing where their open times are. Making sure that they block out times in their calendar that are very specific to study for very specific classes in that case. So if a student does not have a planner or a calendar, that's the first step, and that is very, very helpful for a student. I don't like when students tell me that they just use their phone only. I think there's something about writing some things down in a planner or some kind of a book of some sort, making those to-do lists that are manageable for them, because again, there's something about taking the time to do that again helps our brain process what the expectations are for that day and what we need to do in that proper management of those time blocks. Blocking the times out that they see that they have open, again, to study, no matter if they have an assignment due or not. And so what I'm talking about there is if they block a time out, not to have them just say that that's study time, to actually block it out for maybe Math 151 or block it out and label it Econ 202, whatever it may be. So that way they are getting in a routine of working on the material on a very systematic way. They may have certain assignments due every week on a certain day, and so that means maybe blocking the day before out certain times that they know that they're going to work on those assignments and make sure that they get them in on a timely manner. The biggest thing is that a lot of students coming from high school to college especially, they were used to a routine in high school, all of a sudden they don't have a routine anymore. And they're kind of expected to build a routine, and a lot of students struggle with that. And so that's some of the beginning things that we do with students in the Ranella Learning Center when they come in and ask for help, is to just get them on that timely routine of managing their time, seeing what times that they have available, and blocking out time very effectively that they're going to use for those very specific classes. We need to encourage students to say no. Oftentimes students want to get involved in so many clubs and go out with so many friends and do all of these different things outside of the classroom, but students oftentimes have struggles of saying no to people, and so they need to get in the habit of saying no. And so oftentimes when I meet with a student and they tell me that they have a hard time saying no to people, it's just to say and use the excuse that they have an appointment, but that appointment really is with themselves. And so they can leave their hall or dorm room or whatever, go someplace, but that appointment is for themselves to study at that point. We encourage students not necessarily to use their dorm room or residence hall or apartment or house, wherever they're living, as their primary study area. We encourage them to find locations on campus to stop in at before going home, because once they go home, that's the distraction area. And so all kinds of distractions are around them, be it TV, computer, friends stopping in their rooms or at their house or whatever. And so we encourage after class to immediately go to maybe a study location on campus, such as King Library or study lounges in Armstrong, whatever it may be, prior to going home, because they're going to be more effective with their time that way of getting things done along the way. So if you hear that they go instantly home or right to their dorm room after class, you may encourage them and get in their ear about maybe stopping off someplace along the way prior to getting to their location of residence to do some work, and that way, again, they're being more effective. We do have some online resources related to time management and our self-help resources. We actually have some digital online modules, and they are open to you as well as students. And so if you go to our main page, which I'll have at the end of the webinar, it's digital resources right in the middle of our main page, and you'll see some of the online workshops. And so these are designed for students and parents and family members to kind of glance through just to get some ideas. If they don't want to ask for help physically to somebody on campus, they can still have some help through our online resources and maybe get some ideas about better managing their time. Another thing that we want to make sure that students do is to make sure that they're taking care of themselves and living a healthy lifestyle. There's different cycles at every university where all of a sudden students become sick. Usually it's when they come back from breaks, such as fall break, spring break, and so on. Those first couple of weeks, a lot of different, germs are being floated around, and it's important for students, again, to go to class, be healthy, so that way they can, again, perform at their top level. And so we need to encourage them to be physically active, to be emotionally and mentally stable as much as possible. And if they need some help with that, then there are some resources available for that, such as the Counseling Center, the Health Center, and the Rec Center. But you may want to inquire about their nutrition and whether they are exercising or how their sleep has been since they've been on campus, because those things are equally important for our brains to function at their peak level in those cases as well. Some other campus resources that, again, students can access now is their divisional academic advisors. And I bring this up because next week also starts registration for classes for spring semester. And so students will be issued time tickets, and actually I think they've already gotten their time tickets, and so they can go onto Banner Web to see when they can go online to start registering for classes for the spring. Divisional academic advisors are a key resource to kind of decide what courses to take next semester. If they are struggling or having academic issues, they can talk to that academic advisor about that, because again, it might be the balance of their schedule. Maybe they're finding out that they're not a morning person or an evening person and their brains don't function as well, and so thinking about when to schedule classes is very important. But to also talk about the course repeat policy, which again is when students don't do well in a certain class, they are able to repeat a class and have the first attempt grade drop from their GPA calculation and have the new grade implemented into that. Students with the policy now have 2 opportunities to do that. And so that might be something to consider even next semester if they know they're not going to be successful in a class now, to be able to withdraw and or finish it out, but also maybe retaking that class again, especially if it's a class that is needed for future classes and has to have a grade prerequisite in order to meet or take those future classes. Again, divisional academic advisors are very busy right now meeting with students, so I would highly encourage students to try to call their advisor to make an appointment, but also many of the college or divisional academic advisors also have some walk-in hours over the next couple weeks, so students can possibly go in and meet with somebody instantly to talk about the classes that they're going to sign up for. But again, their time tickets have been issued. That's a great question to ask your child now, of when can they go online in order to schedule classes, and that will start next week, but every student has their own individual time that they are able to go in to register for classes. The other resource on campus, if there's either your child has a disability that has been identified or maybe they think they have a disability, what we highly encourage you to do is contact the Miller Center for Student Disability Services office, which is located in the Shriver Center. And so this would be to get some kind of accommodations based on the disability for maybe future use. These could include testing accommodations, such as the student might need a distraction-reduced environment to take their test. Maybe they can need extra time for their test, and so they might be granted time and a half or double time based on their accommodation. And also sometimes there's some in-class accommodations, such as maybe they get permission to have late assignments, or they might get permission for some absences if they have a condition that, again, affects them with their attendance to classes. A quick call to the Miller Center and having an appointment made would be what I would suggest if there is any kind of a disability. If a student got accommodations in the past in their high school or something like that, it might be a nice thing for the student to have some accommodations set, just as a safety net. The students do not have to use the testing accommodations unless they choose to. So if they are in a class that they're comfortable of taking the test within the class with all the other students, they do not have to use the accommodation, but it is nice to have that safety net in case they do want them, especially prior to final exam week, where again, students oftentimes stress out about completing their exams in a timely manner, and so that might be an accommodation that could help them. They do need to have a diagnosed disability in order to get the accommodations, and oftentimes the paperwork can be filled out through their family physician at that point. And then finally, as far as the other type of resources, before I go into what Ranella does, are the How Writing Center. First of all, this is the Writing Center that is located in King Library, but they also have several locations around campus, some satellite locations. This is where a student can have their papers reviewed prior to turning them in. So if they have a class that has a lot of papers that are due, or maybe a large paper that's due, I always encourage students to have somebody at the tutors at the How Writing Center look over that paper before turning it in. Students may be struggling with just getting started on a paper or understanding what the prompt of the paper is. The tutors there can help with that as well. And so they can help with any stage of the writing process, not just simply the final review, but if they are even struggling of organizing their paper, trying to, again, make sure that they have everything that the prompt needs, I'd highly encourage them to go to the How Writing Center. That is a free service to students. Their website is there, and they can make an appointment through their website. Many of the departments on campus also have tutoring available or help sessions available. I know for certain, and this is what I brought up through the math department, because a lot of students struggle with math this first semester. The math department themselves have some math help sessions for both Math 104 and Math 151, and notice they are in the location the same days, Monday through Thursday, 6:30 to 8. So that way, again, students can go in there, get their questions answered in those help sessions. It is a walk-in type of service there, so they do not need to have an appointment for any of those help sessions. And so other departments probably have those, so if a student is struggling, say maybe with a physics class or a chemistry class, they may want to inquire within the department or give that department a call to see whether that department offers any kind of individual tutoring and or help sessions for certain classes. The Ranella Learning Center, which I'm representing, we also have pre-tutoring as well as SI, academic coaching, counseling workshops, and I'm going to go into those very briefly. Before I do that, is there any questions at this point that anybody has? All right, don't see any, so I'm going to go into what specifically the Ranella Learning Center does, and again, if you have questions, you can highlight this at any time. First of all, we are the main tutoring resource on campus, and so we have tutoring available for a variety of 100, 200 level courses. We rarely do the 300, 400 level classes unless we have a tutor on staff that is able to do that. Our tutoring is typically either individual or group tutoring, depending on the course. If it is a group tutoring, the maximum in the group is typically 4, and our scheduling system, which is an online scheduling system through our website, limits that to 4, as well as only students that have the same instructor for the course are paired together in a group tutoring. So that way we are not pairing one professor that might be working on one topic with a different professor, even though it's the same class, that might be dealing with a different chapter. And so if they are in a group setting, then the students are grouped together based on the class, as well as that they have the same instructor at that point. Our tutors are peer tutors, and so we do not hire professional tutors. They are undergraduate and graduate students that work for us that's taken the classes here at Miami before and or tested out of those classes when they came in. Our tutors have to have a 3.0 GPA or higher. When we actually pool all of our tutors, this year our GPA for all of our tutors combined is around a 3.65. And so we do have very strong students that help not just with the content, but oftentimes giving advice about how to study for a certain type of course. Maybe they had that instructor in the past and they can kind of give some advice about how to study for that professor's exams. But also they're kind of an accountability partner, that they've gone through some of the things on these classes, know how demanding they are, and can kind of preview what's coming up, as well as helping them stay up to date with the material that's being covered. All of our tutors had to have a B or higher in the class that they are tutoring, and so they are qualified to be strong tutors. We have about 55 to 60 tutors that work for us. All of them also go through a highly respected training program that is actually credited by the CRLA group, which is the College Reading and Learning Association. So they go through a certification process with that training, and so our tutors do walk away being nationally recognized tutors with our training program. our appointment process is an online process, and so if you go to our website, on the far right of our main page of our website, and again, I'll have the website on at the end of the webinar, you'll see to schedule an appointment or find a tutor in that case. And so that's what the student would do. When they open up that and click on that, what they'll see is basically a screen where they type in their unique ID. Then their name will pop up, all of their classes will populate into that site, and then they'll select which class that they need help with, and then they'll say or be asked to search for a tutor. Once they do that, all of the available openings for the tutoring will be popped up on the screen, and then they select which one would be convenient for them. At this time in the semester, a lot of students have booked up a lot of the appointments, but we do have some still available. Usually around week 9 or week 10, our tutoring appointments even become more available because students either withdraw from a class, drop a course, and so they aren't needing that weekly tutoring anymore, and so some appointments even pop up later in the semester, even more so. Just to give you an example of how many students that we've seen so far through week 8, and we are on week 9 right now, but we've seen about 753 students for tutoring, and they've come in around 2,570 times for courses. We do have on our website the courses that we do tutor and that we have tutoring for. If a student looks at that list and does not find their course that they need help with, we still encourage them to contact us because we may have a tutor on staff, since we have 55 to 60 that work for us, that might have taken that class before. Even though we don't necessarily advertise that we tutor, we will still pair them up if we can at that point. And so, again, if it is a 300, 400 level class, where we still encourage them to contact us because maybe they can also get some ideas of how to study for the class, even though they might be struggling with the content. And again, the instructor is their primary source that we've encouraged them to go to for the content. The other service that we offer that's even more popular, as you can see at the bottom with the number of sessions that we have visits to, is our Supplemental Instruction program. This is where we target some at-risk classes at Miami. And notice I didn't say in those classes are at-risk students, but they're at-risk because they might have a historically difficult kind of reputation. They might have a high DWF rate, which means a high percentage of students get D's, F's, or withdraw from the class every semester. So that way we know that's a difficult class for students. And so what we do is we target those classes. We find students that have been successful, maybe got an A, A- in those classes in the past, maybe you've worked with that instructor that is teaching that class before or had that instructor, and we pay the student to actually sit in the class again with the students. And so the student is going to listen to the instructor just like all the other students. The student's going to, go through all the motions of taking notes, kind of reading the textbook, staying on top of what the material is, but then that student leader holds 2 out-of-class review sessions every week for students in that class specifically. And so by now, students have been introduced to their SI leader in class. They should have gotten a lot of emails about those review sessions, and so we encourage them to go on a regular basis. Of course, right before an exam, these sessions have a lot of students attend because they want to get any kind of insights about what's going to be on that exam, since that SI leader works with the instructor, ask the instructor what they need to cover for that exam, and might get, again, some hints about it. And they can also answer questions or ask questions in a more comfortable environment in that setting. However, again, regular attendance to them we have found just as effective, or if not more effective, than just going to the review sessions for the exams only. And so this is the student working on the class continuously. It's really studying. Even though they're going to a review session, they can count that as study hours that they're putting in, work towards that goal that they might have for the class. And so these are free to students to go to these review sessions. Some of them are offered on Saturdays and Sundays even, but most of them are in the evening during the week, and hopefully outside of the other classes that the students go to. The student cannot go to one of the SI sessions because they might have another class. We do have tutoring available for all the classes that we have SI for, and so we encourage them to do one or the other, but we oftentimes have students do both, that they go to the SI sessions, but also sign up for a tutor through the Riddell Learning Center as well. Again, you can see through week 8, students that have attended SI sessions, we've had over 2,000, and we've had over 6,000 visits to these. So it's even more popular than our tutoring program because we have intentionally targeted some of these courses, and students see this SI leader regularly sitting next to them in the class, and they're confident that that student knows what's going on a day-to-day basis. We have on our website posted the courses that we do have SI for, but I would highly encourage you asking your child whether they have any SI leaders in their class, because your child will be, first of all, surprised that you know what that is, but it is one of the most effective programs that we have. We track the grades at the end of the semester, every semester for the last maybe 5 to 10 years on students that go to the SI sessions compared to the students that don't go to the SI sessions. And what we find is that students that go on a regular basis will typically get a half a grade to almost a whole letter grade higher than the students that don't go. So we know it's effective, we know it works, and so we want to encourage students to take advantage of that resource as much as possible. It is a voluntary thing. They do not have to sign up for an appointment to go to this. They are, they know the SI review sessions in class because the SI leaders announce when those are, and then again, they just show up for those to sign in because we track that way. But again, it's no charge to students, and they don't have to sign up for an appointment to deal with those SI review sessions. The other service that we offer in our Learning Center, Ranella Learning Center, is what we call academic coaching and counseling. If a student is struggling across the board, which some students right now are because of the midterm grades coming out, it might be because of how they're studying, what their thought processes are, the time management process that they're going through is affecting all of their classes rather than just simply maybe content in one class where they might just only had a poor midterm grade in just one class, but maybe they have poor grades across the board. And so this is where it's really a conversational process with the student. The student can either meet with a graduate student staff member and or a learning specialist within our Learning Center on a weekly basis so that they have kind of a coach involved. This is kind of like an accountability partner that a lot of students maybe desire that they don't have now that they're out of the household where you were their accountability partner before. Typically, these are half hour once a week, sometime when they're in our area, to stop in and talk to that learning specialist or GA. And it's tailored around that student-specific needs. And so it is a one-on-one conversation only, so we don't do these in group settings. But oftentimes we're going to start with how they manage their time, kind of making sure that they're staying on top of assignments, making sure that they, again, are plotting out time to do the assignments on a regular basis to have them done when they are due, as well as maybe, plotting out the time when they need to do some reading and when they need to battle a test that's coming up, putting together a battle plan for that test and a study plan for it, as well as then just kind of improvements for study skills. What we find more and more is that oftentimes students come to college. Yes, they were successful in high school, but oftentimes they don't really have the study strategies and skills that they need for college level work. And it's not their fault because they've never been taught those. And so oftentimes that's what we see is that when we work with these students on a one-on-one basis is that they've never been shown some of these things, and so they're seeking ideas and seeking kind of information about how to study more effectively and efficiently, how to put together a study guide for a class, or how to read more efficiently with different strategies. Maybe it's their note-taking skills aren't necessarily up to par, and so we can talk about some different note-taking strategies and so on. But oftentimes, again, it's organization, it's setting the goals up so that way they're successful in all of their classes rather than, again, struggling with just one in those cases. Oftentimes, students need resource information as well, and they don't know where to go to ask for it, so we can help them navigate that university system to think about where those different resources that could be helpful to them are located and what they need to do to access those different university systems. In the future, if a student is still struggling, even maybe after the first or second semester, the Ranella Learning Center offers actually a class as well. It's called the Learning Strategies for College Success. It's a 2-credit-hour class. It's called EDT 110. It is taken for a grade, so it can help with GPA, but it does a lot of reflection on what students' struggles are, where students' successes were. It'll go through some different strategies and so on that were offered in the academic coaching or academic counseling, but this is more in a class setting. So we'll cover time management skills and note-taking skills and reading comprehension skills, different learning strategies that the student may need along the way that can help them with the classes at the time being, as well as future semesters in those ways. Also, we'll kind of look at how the student learns best and looking at learning styles and personality styles and maybe thinking about how that can be incorporated into their academics a little bit. Kind of being aware of what their current behaviors are, because sometimes students aren't, and they are just kind of go through the motions but don't really reflect about what their behaviors are doing to their academic either success or failure in those cases. I always put this picture up on this slide as well when I talk to parents, because this is what we sell in our Learning Center, and this is our planner. Remember I said one of the keys to success for students is managing their time and maybe using a calendar or a planner. We sell one in our office for $15, and it is a semester-by-semester planner, and you can even kind of tell on the side there that it is dated by the weeks and the months of the semester, so that way, again, they can kind of put in that calendar system or have this planner to help them kind of organize their time, organize their assignments, organize what they need to do throughout that semester in those cases. This is offered on a semester basis. Oftentimes it is for students that are mandated to take it because they are on academic probation, but again, there's always some openings if a student has a strong desire to take it to improve their skills. Is something to consider in the future semesters. Throughout the semester also, the Ranella Learning Center offers some workshop series type of topics, and so these are hour-long workshops on a variety of topics, and so you can see again, we're kind of preaching again a lot of these kind of success type of skills of time management, note-taking, critical reading, how they prepare for tests, if they suffer for test anxiety, how to cope with that, motivation and procrastination, which a lot of students struggle with. But these times, dates, and locations for our workshops are located on our website. Students will also be sent some emails, especially first-year students, about when these are offered, as well as the times and locations for those as well. But they can, again, you can access those in a listing that we have on our website of the future different workshops that we do have coming up that could be helpful, especially towards the end of the semester when we have final exam preparation and students are trying to kind of navigate that system and prepare for all their final exams. These are free to students as well, and so again, they can sign up for them, or they can just show up to the location and time and date and listen to the workshop, but there is no extra charge for any of those attendance. So that's a lot of the things that the Ranella Learning Center does. What I also want you to kind of be aware of is really what happens at the end of the semester. And so even though this is titled mid-semester kind of grades, I want to kind of preview what could happen at the end, because that's oftentimes information that's very important to parents and family members as well as students. And so at the end of the first semester after the fall, and so this is primarily for students that are here for the very first time, so incoming freshmen and so on. If a student has and finishes the first semester with an overall GPA of over a 2.0, then that student is considered to be in good standing. So there's no action that's done by the university to the student at all, because again, in order to graduate from Miami, that overall GPA has to be a 2.0 in order to receive their diploma, so they are on target as long as their overall GPA for that semester and the entire time that they're here is over a 2.0. So if it's their first semester, then that's the only thing that's been calculated. If they are an upper class student, again, as long as their overall GPA is over a 2.0, they are considered in good standing. If a student has less than 16 credit hours at the end of the first semester, meaning that they are mainly a first semester freshman here at Miami, and let's say at the end of the semester when the grades are posted, their fall semester GPA is under a 2.0, so maybe it's a 1.9 or a 1.85 or lower. Then that student is then considered on what we call academic warning, and that's what their status would be. Holds are placed on their account at that point, And sometimes then there are some required meetings that has to happen. And so there might be some required meetings to meet with their academic advisor from their college or where their major is located, because that academic advisor might have some advice about retaking classes. Maybe they had a class that needed a prerequisite that they were signed up for in the spring that they can no longer take, and so meeting with that academic advisor to know what they need to do in order to substitute for that. But again, that academic advisor can tell them what their future choices are in order to improve their GPA, especially if they plan on retaking a course that they either failed or got a D in that they didn't do very well in, and how that kind of will work. The other meeting that possibly could happen is meeting with the learning specialist from Grinnell Learning Center, but more than likely they will be asked to complete kind of an online module class through the Grinnell Learning Center for their academic warning status. This just kind of walks them through some information about what their status is, what is required of them from moving forward, as well as different resources or habits changes that they may need to do during their spring semester in order to be more successful than what they were in the fall at that point. And so again, the student is still here at Miami, so if they do not do well and they fall under a 2.0 in that very first semester that they're here, they are not kicked out of school. They do return or can return to take classes in the spring, but that spring semester is going to be very, very important in that case, and so that they can bounce back. Maybe they need to reconsider what classes that they're taking for the spring in order to be more successful, rather than taking a major load of classes or a major amount of credit hours. They may want to reduce that down just to get success under their belt, so that way they can move forward, feel good about themselves, and maybe make up for some of the things that they lacked during the fall semester. After the first year, so now we're really talking about after spring semester. If a student is above 16 credit hours at that point, and they have an overall GPA of under a 2.0. So that means that they combine the fall and spring term GPAs together in one whole GPA, the cumulative GPA. If that is under a 2.0, then the student is considered on academic probation at that point. Again, they are able to return to Miami University that following fall if they so desire. They can take classes. However, in that next semester, they must obtain a term GPA of 2.0 or higher, or at that time they will be suspended from the university. So that means at the end of spring semester, maybe their cumulative GPA is at a 1.85. That means next fall, the courses that they sign up for, they have to have a 2.0 or better in the fall semester classes that they are taking. So their full focus has to be on those classes in the fall. If they're over a 2.0, then they are continuing to be able to come back to Miami University at that point. If they are on probation, they may have a required registration for that EDT 110 class that I talked about earlier, that talks about improving study skills. That is a credit-bearing 2 credit hour class. Or they may have to have an academic coach requirement, meaning that they meet regularly with somebody in our Grinnell Learning Center on a weekly basis to help them stay on top of things. If a student is suspended, so maybe, again, under a 2.0 at the end of this year, next fall they got under a 2.0 in those fall term classes and they are suspended, the student needs then, or is required to sit out 2 semesters before returning at that point. And so again, they will be given that information with their academic advisors about what needs to happen. For all other students, again, if ever their GPA is under a 2.0, so maybe they are a junior and all of a sudden their GPA all of a sudden creeped under a 2.0, they are on automatic academic probation status. There is not an academic warning once the student reaches over 16 credit hours at that point. So a student, even as senior, could go on to academic probation if all of a sudden they had a bad semester and their overall GPA did come under a 2.0 at that point. So, in conclusion, again, and I can take some additional questions here, when in doubt, we say that any student can schedule a meeting with us at the Grinnell Learning Center just to talk through their academic performance concerns. They don't have to meet with us on a regular weekly basis like an academic coaching or counseling type of meeting. It could just be a one-time thing where they're searching for ideas to get better. and so they can meet with somebody to do that. But again, we encourage them to reach out for help. It's an expectation. Again, appointments can be scheduled by phone, and there's our phone number, or they can stop by our main office, which is in Shriver Center 306, to get an appointment scheduled with one of our learning specialists and so on. I said that I would pop up our Learning Center website, and so you could go to miamioh.edu/learning, or if you go to our main page, miamioh.edu, and type in Learning Center or Ranella Learning Center up in the search box, it will lead you to the choices that would get you and navigate you to our main site as well. So if there's any time, there's some questions in this case. One thing that I will highlight is that this webinar has been recorded, and so it will be sent out along with the slides that I've presented. And so at any point, if you need to re-look at some of the slides or re-listen to some of the text that was given to you, you're welcome to look for that on the Parent and Family Programs page at that point. I appreciate your time. I don't see any other questions coming through. Again, if you have questions, feel free to contact us. Encourage you to, again, talk to your child about their grades right now before it's too late in the semester, and just encourage to dive deeper into how they're doing with things, and encourage them to ask for help as well, because we know that's, again, a very tough thing for a student to kind of show those vulnerabilities, but we encourage and expect them to reach out to us if they need help along the way. Thank you for your time today, and everybody have a pleasant day.